Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere a little louder than our usual historical disasters. A place where the humidity is trying to drown you, the jungle is trying to stab you, and the map in your hand becomes outdated approximately 5 minutes after you look at it. We're talking about the Vietnam War, not the movie version with dramatic helicopter shots and perfectly timed rock music. The real version, the sweaty version, the version where your socks never truly dry, your dinner arrives in a can, and every bush looks vaguely suspicious. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft, white noise, get comfortable, and maybe appreciate the fact that your ceiling probably isn't leaking tropical rainwater onto your forehead. And let's think about this for a moment. Could you function on 4 hours of sleep while carrying half your body weight in equipment through a jungle that feels like a wet blanket wrapped around your entire existence? Could you tell the difference between a harmless patch of grass and something that wants to rearrange your legs? Would you remember where you were supposed to be going after 3 days of rain, mud, mosquitoes, and confusion? How long would it take before you trade your favorite streaming service for one dry pair of socks? Would you remain calm when every strange sound in the darkness suddenly feels important? And perhaps most importantly, how many minutes would pass before you started wondering whose idea this was in the first place? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in Vietnam. It's 1968. The air is already hot. Your uniform is already damp. And the day hasn't even started yet. You wake before sunrise, not because you're refreshed, but because nature has decided sleeping comfortably is no longer an option. The air feels thick enough to chew. Your clothes are damp, your blanket is damp, and somehow even your thoughts feel damp. Back home, people complain when the thermostat is 2 degrees too high. Here, the entire atmosphere appears to be actively participating in your discomfort. For a few seconds, lying there in the darkness, you try to convince yourself that maybe it's not that bad. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe this is one of those situations where your brain is simply being dramatic. Then a drop of sweat rolls from your forehead into your ear while you are doing absolutely nothing. Nope, it's that bad. The sun hasn't even come up yet, and already the heat is wrapping itself around you like a warm, wet towel that somebody forgot to remove 3 days ago. The humidity in Vietnam wasn't merely weather. It was an active presence, a permanent roommate, a clingy friend who never understood personal boundaries. You sit up and immediately discover that your shirt is stuck to your back again. At this point, clothing isn't really clothing anymore. It's more of a second layer of moisture. The jungle around you is slowly waking up. Somewhere in the distance, insects are buzzing, birds are calling. Strange noises echo through the trees. The entire landscape sounds alive, which would be comforting if so many of the living things weren't interested in biting, stinging, scratching, or otherwise inconveniencing you. The air smells earthy and green, wet soil, dense vegetation, rotting leaves. Everything is growing, decomposing, or preparing to grow and decompose again. The jungle never really stops working. Unlike you are already tired. The remarkable thing about tropical humidity is that it completely changes your relationship with sweat. Back home, sweat is something that happens after exercise, maybe after mowing the lawn, maybe after carrying groceries upstairs. Here, Sweat is simply your natural state. You sweat while walking. You sweat while sitting. You sweat while eating. You sweat while thinking about walking. At some point, you stop asking whether you're sweating and begin asking whether there's any part of your body that isn't. The answer is usually no. Veterans often describe uniforms that never truly dried. You could hang clothing overnight, give it every opportunity to recover, and somehow wake up to find it still damp. The jungle seemed determined to maintain a 24-hour moisture subscription. Even your boots become participants in this arrangement. Every morning, you slide your feet into footwear that feels suspiciously similar to yesterday's footwear. Because it is yesterday's footwear. Wet yesterday's footwear. Modern people spend hundreds of dollars on breathable athletic shoes designed to keep feet comfortable. You are currently participating in an experiment called "How long can socks remain damp before they achieve sentience?" The answer remains unclear. As dawn begins to brighten the sky, the heat quietly increases another level. It's almost impressive. The sun approaches the horizon like a supervisor arriving for work. The night shift of discomfort is ending. The day shift is reporting for duty, and the day shift is much more ambitious. You glance around and notice everyone else looking equally miserable. That's one of the strange comforts of military life. Nobody is enjoying this. Nobody has discovered a secret technique for becoming immune to tropical weather. Everyone is sweating. Everyone is sticky. Everyone is wondering how it can possibly be this hot before breakfast. There is a certain fairness to shared suffering. Of course, the humidity isn't just uncomfortable. It drains energy. It makes movement harder. It turns simple tasks into exhausting ones. Carrying equipment becomes more difficult. Staying hydrated becomes critical. Even concentrating requires effort. It's as though the air itself is gently taxing every decision you make, one bead of sweat at a time. And yet, after enough days, something remarkable happens. You adapt. Not completely. Nobody truly befriends this level of humidity. But you stop being surprised by it. You stop expecting comfort. You stop waiting for a cool breeze that never arrives. Instead, you learn to work with it, to endure it, to accept that every morning begins the same way. The jungle wakes up. The air thickens. Your clothes stick to your skin. And somewhere in the distance, another day is beginning. A long day. Because humidity, as you're about to discover, is merely the opening act. Breakfast is waiting. And breakfast, unfortunately, is not bringing better news. Before you've properly opened your eyes, breakfast arrives in the form of military rations. Tiny cans, powdered drinks, crackers capable of surviving a nuclear event, and food whose exact identity remains a matter of ongoing debate. It's technically breakfast. Legally, perhaps. Spiritually, the jury is still out. You settle down wherever there's room, which usually means somewhere that is simultaneously muddy, uncomfortable, and occupied by at least 3 species of insect. The jungle has a funny way of removing the concept of a dining room from your expectations. There are no cozy kitchen tables here, no sizzling bacon, no fresh coffee drifting through the house, no cheerful morning television reminding you that today's weather will be partly cloudy. You are the weather, specifically the sweaty part. The meal in front of you comes from a cardboard box containing canned military rations, commonly known as sea rations. These little bundles of culinary optimism were designed to survive rough handling, tropical climates, transportation across oceans, and apparently the collapse of civilization itself. The cans are durable. The food inside is present. You begin the daily ritual of opening breakfast. Some soldiers became remarkably skilled at identifying meals by touch alone. After enough time, you develop a relationship with your ration menu that resembles a lottery system. Maybe you'll get something decent. Maybe you'll get something forgettable. Maybe you'll get a meal so unpopular that people immediately start trying to trade it away. Human civilization has invented countless forms of commerce. Here, much of it revolves around avoiding certain canned foods. One of the most infamous entries on the menu is ham and lima beans. The less enthusiastic nickname soldiers gave it is probably not suitable for a relaxing sleep story. Let's just say it wasn't winning many culinary awards. You pry open a can and stare inside. The contents stare back. For a brief moment, neither side makes the first move. Eventually, hunger wins the argument. It usually does. The reality is that these meals served an important purpose. They provided calories, protein, and nutrition under difficult conditions. They were practical, portable, and reliable. Military planners cared far more about keeping people alive than creating a five-star dining experience, which is understandable. Nobody has ever marched into battle thinking, "I hope the garnish is excellent." Still, that doesn't stop you from dreaming about ordinary food. A hamburger, a pizza, fresh fruit, a sandwich that wasn't manufactured 6 months ago and transported halfway around the world. In the jungle, food acquires a strange emotional value. You find yourself remembering meals from home with astonishing detail. You can suddenly recall your mother's cooking, that diner down the street, the smell of a backyard barbecue. Foods you barely appreciated before now seem like priceless treasures. It's amazing how quickly a can of beans can transform you into a philosopher. Meanwhile, somebody nearby is attempting to make coffee. Calling it coffee might be generous. Calling it hot brown military optimism might be more accurate. Still, it contains caffeine. And in the field, caffeine is one of humanity's greatest achievements. The drink comes from powdered packets that dissolve with varying levels of enthusiasm. Sometimes it resembles coffee. Sometimes it resembles an experiment conducted by a scientist who had only heard coffee described once. Nobody cares. It's warm. That alone makes it valuable. As breakfast continues, conversations drift through the morning air. People joke, complain, trade items, tell stories, talk about home. The humor becomes important. In difficult conditions, jokes function almost like survival equipment. You can laugh about terrible food. You can laugh about the weather. You can laugh about your socks being permanently wet. If you stop laughing, you're left with the realization that your socks are permanently wet. So laughter wins. Around you, the jungle continues its endless performance. Birds call from distant trees. Insects buzz. The humid air hangs motionless. The day is already growing hotter. Breakfast, such as it is, comes to an end. The empty cans are packed away. The last crackers disappear. Someone is still complaining about their ration selection. Someone else is trying to trade tomorrow's meal before today has even finished. And honestly, that's understandable, because the real purpose of breakfast isn't enjoyment. It's fuel. A quick pause before the work ahead. A brief moment of normality in a place where very little feels normal. You wipe the sweat from your forehead, adjust your gear, take one final sip of something vaguely coffee-shaped, and rise to your feet. Unfortunately, Breakfast was the easy part. Now you have to carry your entire life on your back. Now it's time to move. The problem is that you're carrying weapons, ammunition, water, supplies, equipment, and enough miscellaneous gear to convince your spine that it has offended somebody important. Every step feels like you're transporting a small appliance store through a swamp. You begin by lifting your pack, or at least attempting to. The pack, meanwhile, has its own opinions. For a brief moment, physics becomes a personal enemy. Modern hikers sometimes spend weeks researching how to reduce pack weight by 3 ounces. They'll watch 27 videos explaining the benefits of titanium spoons. They'll debate backpack materials with the seriousness of international diplomacy. You would happily carry a cast iron bathtub if it meant somebody else was carrying your ammunition. Because out here, weight isn't measured in pounds. It's measured in regret. The average infantryman in Vietnam often carried an astonishing amount of gear: weapons, magazines, grenades, rations, water, medical supplies, extra clothing, protective equipment, radios, batteries, tools, and countless other necessities, all competed for space on your body. Every item had a purpose. Every item was important. Every item was heavy. And naturally, military logic dictated that if something was important, you should probably carry more of it. Soon you're loaded down with enough equipment to make a pack mule nervous. Then somebody hands you something else. There is always something else. Extra batteries, additional ammunition, a radio component, a piece of equipment nobody wanted to carry. Congratulations. It's yours now. The jungle does not care how much you're carrying. In fact, it seems actively amused by the situation. The path ahead is uneven and tangled with roots. Vines hang from branches. Mud waits patiently beneath your boots. Every obstacle appears specifically designed to test whether gravity can embarrass you in front of your friends. The answer is yes, repeatedly. You step over a fallen tree. Your pack catches on a branch. You twist awkwardly. Something pokes you in the back. Something else pokes you in the shoulder. A third object, whose purpose you no longer remember, somehow pokes you in the neck. You continue forward like an overloaded shopping cart, navigating a construction site. And this is still considered progress. The heat makes everything worse. The humidity presses down like an invisible blanket. Sweat pours from beneath your helmet. Your shirt clings to your skin. Your pack straps dig into your shoulders with the enthusiasm of medieval torture devices. Every few minutes, you shift your weight, hoping to find a comfortable position. There isn't one. That's one of the first lessons you learn. Comfort has left the chat. Eventually, your body adapts in strange ways. The weight never becomes light. You simply develop a working relationship with suffering. Your shoulders ache. Your back complains. Your knees file formal protests. But you keep moving, because everyone else is moving too. That's another remarkable thing about military life. Nobody wakes up excited to carry 70 pounds of gear through tropical wilderness, yet somehow the entire group keeps going. Step after step, hour after hour, one foot in front of the other. Occasionally you stop for a short break. These breaks become sacred events. You carefully lower your pack to the ground. The instant the weight leaves your shoulders, you experience what can only be described as a religious awakening. Angels sing. The clouds part. Your spine sends a thank you letter to every known deity. For 30 glorious seconds, life feels wonderful. Then someone says it's time to move again. The angels leave immediately. Back on your feet, you continue deeper into the jungle. Water becomes precious. Every sip matters. The heavier your load feels, the more tempting it becomes to drink everything at once. But experience teaches caution. The day is long, the jungle is longer, and there are few things more depressing than realizing you've run out of water while still hours from your destination. So you ration carefully, sip by sip, step by step. The sounds of the jungle surround you. Birds call overhead. Insects buzz relentlessly. Branches snap beneath boots. Somewhere ahead, another soldier is probably wondering why military planners could not have arranged this entire war closer to a parking lot. It's a fair question, but history rarely provides convenient parking. As the hours pass, the weight settles into your muscles like a permanent resident. You stop noticing individual aches because everything hurts equally. Oddly enough, that almost feels efficient. And just when you think you've figured out how to carry all this equipment through the jungle decides to remind you of something important. Carrying your life on your back is difficult. Carrying it through Vietnam is something else entirely, because now you're about to meet the jungle itself, and the jungle has been waiting for you. The jungle isn't just scenery, it's a living obstacle course. Vines grab at your clothing, roots wait patiently to trip you, branches slap you in the face with surprising accuracy. It's like walking through a forest that personally dislikes you. At first glance, it's beautiful. Towering trees stretch toward the sky. Thick green canopies filter the sunlight into soft golden beams. Exotic birds call from somewhere overhead. Massive leaves sway gently in the humid breeze. The entire landscape looks like something from a nature documentary narrated by a very calm British man. For about 30 seconds, then you actually have to walk through it. That's when you discover the difference between looking at a jungle and existing inside one. The first thing that disappears is your sense of direction. Everywhere you look is green. Green leaves, green vines, green bushes, green trees. Different shades of green arranged in an endless maze designed by somebody who apparently hated maps. You glance behind you. It looks exactly like the path ahead. You glance to the left. More jungle. To the right. Somehow even more jungle. If somebody spun you around 3 times and asked where you came from, you'd probably point directly toward a tree and confidently announce, "That way." It wouldn't help. There are millions of trees. The jungle has no interest in making navigation easy. Then, there are the plants themselves. Many of them seem strangely aggressive. Branches reach into your path at face level. Vines hook onto your equipment. Thorns appear exactly where your hands need to go. Leaves somehow manage to slap you while remaining completely stationary. You begin to suspect the vegetation is coordinating its efforts. A vine catches your pack. You untangle yourself. 2 minutes later, another vine catches your rifle. 5 minutes after that, a branch smacks you directly across the forehead. The jungle isn't attacking you, but it certainly isn't apologizing either. Walking becomes a constant negotiation. Step over this root, duck under that branch, push through those leaves, avoid slipping into that patch of mud. Repeat approximately 10,000 times. The roots are particularly impressive. Massive tree roots snake across the ground like ancient wooden traps, waiting for unsuspecting feet. Every single one appears determined to test your balance. And eventually, one succeeds. Everyone trips. Everyone. The most experienced soldier. The strongest soldier. The soldier who laughed when somebody else fell 5 minutes earlier. The jungle is patient. It gets everyone eventually. One moment, you're marching forward with dignity. The next, You're hugging the ground while your equipment crashes into the nearest bush. The jungle remains completely unimpressed. Meanwhile, the sounds never stop. This surprises many people. When you imagine wilderness, you often imagine peace and quiet. Vietnam's jungles are neither. The air vibrates with life. Insects buzz continuously. Birds call from hidden branches. Leaves rustle overhead. Creatures move through the undergrowth. Everywhere you listen, something is happening. The noise becomes so constant that silence starts to feel suspicious. A sudden quiet moment grabs your attention far faster than the endless background sounds. Your ears learn to sort through the chaos. Most noises are harmless. Most. That's the important word. Most. The jungle teaches you to notice details. A snapped branch. An unusual movement. A sound that doesn't belong. You become a student of your surroundings because your surroundings demand it. And then there are the smells. Modern forests often smell fresh, clean, pleasant. The jungle smells alive. Wet earth, rotting leaves, growing plants, standing water, tree bark, mud. Everything is constantly growing, dying, decomposing, and growing again. The scent hangs heavily in the humid air. It's rich, powerful, and impossible to escape. The entire ecosystem feels busy, relentlessly busy. Nothing stands still for long. Plants spread, insects swarm, roots expand, rain falls. The jungle is always working, always changing, always reclaiming. A trail that exists today may look completely different tomorrow. A clearing can vanish beneath new growth. Nature moves fast here, much faster than you're comfortable with. Hours pass as you continue deeper beneath the canopy. The sunlight grows dimmer. The vegetation grows thicker. Your uniform catches on branches. Your boots sink into soft ground. Sweat drips steadily down your back. And gradually, you begin to understand something important. The jungle isn't merely the place where the war happens. The jungle is one of the main characters. It shapes everything: movement, visibility, communication, comfort, survival. Nothing escapes its influence. By now, your shoulders ache from carrying your gear. Your clothes are soaked. Your legs feel heavier than they did this morning, and you've spent most of the day walking through a green maze that seems to extend forever. Unfortunately, you're about to learn one of the strangest truths about military life in Vietnam. The walking itself is only the beginning, because now comes the endless patrol. Hours pass, then more hours, then somehow even more hours. Much of military life isn't dramatic action. It's walking. Walking while sweating. Walking while listening. Walking while wondering whether you've been walking in a circle since Tuesday. If someone learned everything they knew about war from movies, they'd probably assume every moment is packed with explosions, heroic speeches, and dramatic music. In reality, much of your day is spent putting one boot in front of the other. Again, and again, and again. The patrol moves steadily through the jungle, weaving between trees and over uneven ground. Nobody is rushing. Nobody is sprinting. The pace is deliberate, careful, methodical. the sort of pace that makes a mile feel much longer than it sounds on paper. You quickly discover that distance means very little here. Back home, 5 miles might be a pleasant afternoon walk. In the jungle, 5 miles can feel like crossing a continent. Every obstacle slows you down. Every patch of mud steals energy. Every tangled vine demands attention. Every steep hill reminds you that gravity remains fully operational. The strangest part is how much time you spend simply looking ahead, looking to the sides, looking behind, looking at the ground, looking into shadows, looking at places where nothing appears to be happening. Because out here, paying attention is part of the job. The jungle hides things. Sometimes harmless things, sometimes not. So your eyes never really get a break. Neither do your ears. You listen constantly. The crunch of boots, the rustle of leaves, the calls of birds, the distant hum of insects, the soft clink of equipment. Every sound gets filed away somewhere in your brain. Most of it means nothing. But occasionally something feels different. And that's enough to keep you alert. After several hours, the patrol begins to settle into a rhythm. Step, breathe, step, breathe, step. Adjust your pack. Step, swat at a mosquito. Step, wonder what day it is. Step, forget what day it is. There's something almost hypnotic about it. Not relaxing, just repetitive. Your world shrinks to immediate concerns. The next step, the next hill, the next water break, the next place to sit down for 30 glorious seconds. Modern life is filled with distractions. Phones, emails, notifications, news alerts, text messages. Here, most of those disappear. Instead, your entire existence becomes remarkably simple. Walk, watch, listen, repeat. You'd think simplicity would be peaceful. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't, because the mind has a funny habit of filling empty space. As the miles accumulate, your thoughts begin to wander. You think about home. You think about food. You think about old friends. You think about things you haven't thought about in years. A song you heard once, a teacher from childhood, a dog you used to have. The human brain can find remarkable subjects to focus on when it's spent 6 hours walking through a jungle. Sometimes entire conversations develop, not because there's anything urgent to discuss, just because talking helps break up the monotony. Soldiers trade stories, jokes, rumors, memories, opinions about food, strong opinions about food. An astonishing number of conversations somehow return to food. You can spend all morning discussing hamburgers that aren't present, pizza that doesn't exist, milkshakes that are hundreds of miles away. The less available something becomes, the more interesting it seems. By midday, even a perfectly ordinary sandwich begins to acquire mythical status. The patrol continues. The sun climbs higher. The heat intensifies. Sweat drips from helmets and sleeves. Uniforms grow heavier. Boots grow muddier. The jungle remains endless. One hill leads to another. One trail becomes another trail. 1 hour quietly becomes 3, then 4, then 5. Occasionally, someone asks how much farther there is to go. This is usually a mistake. The answer is almost never encouraging. Military distance operates according to mysterious laws. Something described as not much farther can sometimes feel geographically impossible. Still, nobody stops. That's the remarkable thing. You keep moving. The person ahead of you keeps moving. The person behind you keeps moving. Everyone just continues forward, step after step, hour after hour, because that's what the patrol demands. And eventually, somewhere deep in the repetition, you realize something strange. The walking itself isn't the hardest part. The uncertainty is. Because while you're moving through the jungle, watching every shadow and listening to every unfamiliar sound, one question remains quietly lodged in the back of your mind. What if something is out there, watching you back? And that question is about to become much more important, because now it's time to meet the enemy you can't see. One of the most unsettling parts of the conflict is uncertainty. The jungle hides everything. You can't always tell where danger is, when it's coming, or whether it's there at all. Your imagination quickly becomes one of the most active participants in the war. Back home, most threats announce themselves. A car horn blares, a storm rolls in. Your doctor calls and says, "We need to talk." You generally know when something bad is approaching. The jungle operates differently. The jungle prefers mystery. You continue moving through the dense vegetation, eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of tall grass, every opening between trees. Nothing appears unusual, which somehow makes it worse. Because after enough time, nothing unusual starts feeling suspicious. You find yourself staring at an ordinary bush, just a bush, a completely innocent bush, and yet part of your brain immediately whispers, "But what if it's not?" This is one of the great psychological challenges of the Vietnam War. The uncertainty never really leaves. Unlike traditional battlefields where opposing armies often faced one another across relatively open ground, Vietnam's terrain frequently concealed everything. The jungle could hide movement. It could hide equipment. It could hide entire groups of people. Sometimes danger was visible. Often it wasn't. That uncertainty follows you everywhere. Every patrol, every trail, every clearing, every quiet moment, especially the quiet moments, because silence has a way of becoming louder than noise. A bird suddenly stops calling. The insects seem less active. The jungle changes in some subtle way you can't quite explain. Maybe it's nothing. Most of the time it is. But most of the time can become an uncomfortable phrase when your safety depends on the exceptions. Your senses become sharper, or at least they try to. You start noticing details that never would have mattered back home. A broken branch, fresh footprints, an unusual sound, a patch of disturbed earth, a movement at the edge of your vision. The human brain becomes remarkably attentive when properly motivated, and few motivations are stronger than uncertainty. Of course, the problem is that your imagination becomes remarkably attentive too. The longer you spend in the jungle, the more creative your mind becomes. That distant shadow? Probably a tree. Maybe. That movement in the leaves? Probably a bird. Hopefully. That strange sound? Probably nothing. Probably. You begin having entire internal debates over things that would seem ridiculous anywhere else. Congratulations. You've spent 5 minutes analyzing a shrub. The shrub remains unavailable for comment. Everyone around you experiences some version of this. Nobody says it constantly, but everyone understands it. The tension lives in the background, a low hum beneath daily life. Not overwhelming, just persistent, like a radio playing quietly in another room. The uncertainty also changes the way you move. Patrols become careful, measured, methodical. People watch one another, communicate quietly, pay attention to the environment. The jungle demands patience. Rushing rarely improves anything. If anything, it usually creates new problems. So the patrol advances one careful step at a time, listening, watching, waiting. Hours can pass this way. Long stretches where nothing happens, and then more stretches where nothing happens. This creates a strange paradox. You want nothing to happen. Nothing happening is generally excellent news. But after enough hours, your mind starts expecting something, anything. The anticipation itself becomes exhausting. It's a bit like waiting for an important phone call that never arrives. Except the consequences feel considerably more serious. By late afternoon, your thoughts drift toward home again. It's comforting. At home, uncertainty usually involves smaller questions. Did I lock the door? Did I pay that bill? Did I leave the oven on? Out here, uncertainty feels larger, more tangible, more present. Yet despite all of this, people adapt. Human beings are astonishingly adaptable creatures. We adapt to noise, to discomfort, to routine, and eventually, even to uncertainty. Not because we stop feeling it, but because we learn to carry it. The same way you carry your pack, the same way you carry exhaustion, the same way you carry the heat and humidity. It becomes part of the landscape, not welcome, not pleasant, but familiar. As the patrol continues through the fading afternoon light, you find yourself settling into that strange balance between alertness and routine. Watching, listening, moving forward. The jungle remains silent, or at least as silent as a jungle can be. The shadows grow longer. The air remains heavy. And somewhere nearby, another threat is preparing to make itself known. Not through ambush, not through strategy, not through tactics, but through pure, relentless annoyance. Because next, you are about to discover that the mosquitoes have officially joined the war. The mosquitoes arrive with professional dedication. They work day shifts, night shifts, overtime, and apparently volunteer weekends. Entire armies have struggled to achieve the level of persistence displayed by a single determined mosquito. At first, you barely notice them. One buzz near your ear, a quick swat, a small itch on your wrist. Nothing particularly dramatic. You've dealt with mosquitoes before, maybe on a camping trip, maybe during a summer barbecue, maybe during that one vacation where nature briefly reminded you who was really in charge. You assume these mosquitoes will be similar. This assumption lasts approximately 7 minutes, because Vietnam's mosquitoes aren't merely insects. They're an entire management team. They arrive in groups, they coordinate, they demonstrate an unsettling commitment to their objectives, and their objective is you. The jungle around you contains countless pools of standing water, streams, puddles, flooded craters, and damp areas perfect for mosquito breeding. The tropical climate allows them to thrive year-round. The result is an environment where mosquitoes appear to have achieved numerical superiority. You hear them before you see them. That familiar, high-pitched whine drifts past your ear. Then another. Then 3 more. Soon it sounds like someone is testing tiny, malfunctioning engines all around your head. You slap your neck. Miss. You slap your arm. Miss again. The mosquito, meanwhile, continues its mission completely unfazed. You begin to suspect it has military training. The real problem isn't the occasional bite. It's the accumulation. One bite is annoying. 20 bites become distracting. 50 bites start to feel personal. Every exposed inch of skin becomes valuable real estate. Your hands, your wrists, your neck, your face, anywhere they can reach, anywhere you accidentally leave unprotected, anywhere you forgot to cover for even a moment. The mosquitoes notice. They always notice. You quickly learn that scratching is a dangerous game. The more you scratch, the more everything itches. The more everything itches, the more you scratch. It's a vicious cycle, designed by insects who apparently studied psychology. At some point, you realize you're spending entire conversations absent-mindedly scratching various parts of your body. Nobody comments on it, because everyone else is doing exactly the same thing. One soldier scratches his ankle, another scratches his arm, a third scratches somewhere behind his ear with the determination of a man digging for buried treasure. This is perfectly normal now. The jungle has lowered everyone's standards. Historically, mosquitoes represented more than simple irritation. Diseases such as malaria posed serious threats throughout many tropical regions, including parts of Vietnam. Military units devoted significant effort to prevention through medication, protective measures, insect repellent, and proper clothing. Because while the mosquito itself is small, the problems it can carry are considerably larger. It's one of history's strangest realities. Human beings invent tanks, aircraft, radios, complex weapon systems, then spend much of their time being defeated emotionally by something the size of a paperclip. Nature has a sense of humor, a very strange sense of humor. As evening approaches, the situation somehow gets worse. The air begins to cool slightly, the light starts to fade, and the mosquitoes interpret this as excellent news. Dinner service has begun. The buzzing intensifies. Clouds of insects drift through the humid air like tiny airborne tax collectors. You apply insect repellent, lots of it. The smell becomes part of daily life, along with sweat, mud, wet canvas, and every other scent associated with jungle living. Some soldiers joke that they are now composed of 50% water, 40% mosquito repellent, and 10% determination. The math isn't entirely accurate, but it feels accurate. Nighttime brings its own challenges. You're trying to rest, trying to relax, trying to enjoy a few moments of relative peace. Then, a mosquito appears beside your ear. Bzzz. You swat. Silence. A few moments later, bzzz. Again. It is perhaps the most irritating sound ever created. Not because it's loud, because it's specific. It announces its presence with just enough confidence to make sleep impossible. Eventually, exhaustion wins. It usually does. You drift off despite the bites, despite the itching, despite the endless buzzing hidden within the jungle darkness. By now, you've accepted an important truth. The mosquitoes aren't leaving. They're part of the environment, part of daily life, part of the experience. Tiny, winged reminders that the jungle never stops demanding something from you. As morning arrives once again, you scratch a fresh bite on your arm and continue moving forward. Because while mosquitoes are irritating, they're still far from the most persistent thing you'll encounter out here. That honor belongs to something much larger, something heavier, something capable of getting absolutely everywhere. It's time to talk about mud. Soon you discover that mud exists everywhere, on your boots, in your gear, on your clothing, possibly in your soul. It appears capable of violating several laws of physics simply to make your day more complicated. At first, it seems manageable. Just a little mud, a few puddles, some soft ground after a rainstorm. Nothing particularly alarming. Then Vietnam introduces you to professional-grade mud, the kind of mud that doesn't merely sit on the ground, the kind that actively participates in your day. You take a step forward. Your boot sinks, not dramatically, just enough to let you know who's in charge. You pull your foot free. The mud responds by attempting to keep the boot. This becomes a recurring negotiation. Every step turns into a small tug-of-war between you and the earth itself. The earth is surprisingly stubborn. As the patrol continues, the trail becomes softer, then wetter, then softer again. Soon you're walking through terrain that feels less like land and more like an unfinished soup recipe. Water collects everywhere in the tropical environment. Rainfall is frequent. Drainage isn't always cooperative. The result is a landscape where dry ground occasionally feels like a historical rumor. Someone ahead of you slips. Not a major fall, just enough to produce several muttered comments about gravity. A few minutes later, somebody else slips. Then another. The jungle distributes embarrassment equally. Nobody receives special treatment. The mud doesn't care about rank, or experience, or dignity, especially dignity. Dignity suffers heavily out here. You eventually stop trying to stay clean. This is one of the most liberating and depressing realizations of military life in Vietnam. At some point, you simply surrender. Your boots are muddy, your pants are muddy, your equipment is muddy, the trail is muddy, the air somehow feels muddy. Fighting it becomes pointless. It's like trying to stay dry while swimming. Technically possible for a few seconds. Ultimately hopeless. The mud also possesses remarkable transportation abilities. You track it everywhere. Into camps, onto equipment, into vehicles, onto clothing, inside pockets. How it reaches some of these locations remains one of history's great mysteries. You could carefully clean your gear, meticulously wipe everything down. Spend 20 minutes restoring a small piece of order to your life. Then one brief walk through the jungle returns everything to its natural muddy state. The mud is patient. It always wins eventually. Of course, the real challenge isn't appearance, it's weight. Wet mud clings to boots with extraordinary determination. Each step feels heavier than the last. A little mud becomes a lot of mud. A lot of mud becomes a workout. Soon you're carrying not only your equipment, but several pounds of imported local soil. Entire ecosystems are hitching a ride on your boots. Back home, people pay for resistance training. Here, resistance training pays you. Well, technically, sort of. The trails themselves constantly change. A path that was manageable yesterday may become nearly impassable after a heavy rain. Small streams become larger streams. Larger streams become obstacles, and obstacles become somebody else's problem to solve. The jungle is endlessly creative. Just when you think you've figured out the terrain, it redesigns itself overnight. Rain falls, water flows, mud spreads. Everyone starts over. Again. And then there's the smell. Not necessarily unpleasant, just powerful. Wet earth, rotting vegetation, standing water. The scent of a landscape constantly being reshaped by moisture. The jungle never dries out completely. It simply changes degrees of wetness. Veterans often remembered this vividly. The feeling of wet boots, wet uniforms, wet equipment, wet socks, especially wet socks. Human beings can tolerate many hardships, but there seems to be a universal limit regarding damp socks. Cross that limit, and morale begins filing complaints. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the patrol continues through another stretch of muddy ground. Boots squelch, water splashes. Someone nearly loses their footing. Again. Nobody is surprised anymore. This is normal now. The mud has become part of daily life. part of the environment, part of the routine. You stop fighting it. You simply keep moving, one careful step after another. But while the mud is persistent, there is one force in Vietnam capable of making it dramatically worse. One force capable of transforming a difficult trail into a miserable one. One force capable of soaking everything you own in a matter of minutes. Because overhead, the sky is beginning to change, and that can only mean one thing: the rain is coming. Then comes the rain. Not ordinary rain, tropical rain, the kind that arrives suddenly, loudly, and with the confidence of a marching band. Within minutes, you are soaked so thoroughly that staying dry becomes a historical memory. At first, there are warning signs: a distant rumble, a darkening patch of sky, a subtle shift in the air. The jungle seems to pause for a moment, as if taking a deep breath. You have seen rain before, of course. Everyone has. Back home, rain is often a mild inconvenience. You grab an umbrella, cancel a picnic, complain about your hair. Normal rain has manners. Vietnamese monsoon rain has objectives. You might be walking through the jungle, sweating your way through another patrol, when the first drops begin to fall. Plink, plink, plink. A few scattered droplets strike the leaves overhead. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic. Then, seemingly without warning, the sky opens like a dam has burst somewhere in the heavens. Suddenly, water is everywhere, not falling, attacking. The rain slams into the canopy above with a roar so loud that conversations become impossible. Thousands upon thousands of drops hammer the leaves, branches, and ground below until the entire jungle sounds like it is standing beneath a waterfall. Within seconds, your uniform is soaked. Not damp, not wet, soaked. Every thread, every pocket, every piece of equipment. Water finds all of it. Your boots fill. Your sleeves cling to your arms. Your helmet drips steadily down your neck. You stop trying to stay dry because the concept itself has become ridiculous. It is like trying to remain untouched while swimming in a lake. The battle was lost immediately. The remarkable thing about tropical rain is the sheer volume. It does not politely arrive. It commits. You look around and visibility begins shrinking as curtains of water pour from the sky. Trees that were visible moments ago become blurry shapes. The world turns gray. Gray sky. Gray rain. Gray sheets of water stretching through the jungle. The rain seems endless. Historically, monsoon seasons played a major role in shaping daily life throughout Vietnam. Roads became difficult to navigate. Trails transformed into rivers of mud. Rivers swelled. Low-lying areas flooded. The weather was not merely background scenery. It was an active participant in everything. And right now, it is participating enthusiastically. You continue moving because stopping is not always an option. That is another lesson the jungle teaches. The rain does not care about your schedule. The patrol still has places to go. Tasks still need doing. So you march onward through conditions that would normally convince modern people to spend an entire day indoors, binge-watching television. The ground beneath your feet begins changing almost immediately. The trail softens. Puddles expand. Small streams appear where no streams existed before. That patch of mud you struggled through earlier, congratulations, It is now a larger patch of mud. The jungle is always looking for opportunities to improve your suffering. Water drips from leaves overhead, long after the heaviest rain has passed. Large drops land on your shoulders with surprising force. One lands directly down the back of your shirt. This somehow feels more offensive than the storm itself. The jungle excels at small betrayals. As the hours pass, you start noticing something strange. The rain becomes normal, not enjoyable, never enjoyable, but normal. Humans adapt with astonishing speed. You stop reacting every time water runs down your face. You stop worrying about keeping your sleeves dry. You stop caring whether your boots are wet. They're always wet. Acceptance becomes easier than resistance. And honestly, resistance wasn't working anyway. The smell of the jungle changes during the storm. The scent of wet earth grows stronger. Leaves glisten beneath the rainfall. The air fills with the rich smell of vegetation, soil, and standing water. Everything feels alive. Everything feels damp. Everything is definitely damp. The rain eventually begins to weaken. The roar softens. The downpour becomes a steady shower. Then a drizzle. Then scattered drops falling from the canopy above. For a brief moment, the jungle looks almost magical. Beautiful even. Then you take a step and sink ankle deep into fresh mud. The magic disappears immediately. As the patrol reforms and continues onward, steam rises from the warming ground. The humidity returns with renewed enthusiasm. Your clothes remain soaked. Your boots squish with every step. And yet, strangely enough, you're grateful. Because the rain has ended, at least for now. Unfortunately, the rain leaves behind one final gift. A perfect environment for exhaustion. Because after hours of marching through heat, humidity, mud, and tropical storms, your body is reaching its limit, and soon you'll discover one of the strangest skills soldiers learn in Vietnam: the ability to sleep absolutely anywhere. At some point, exhaustion wins. You learn the remarkable human ability to sleep in places that should never qualify as sleeping locations. Muddy ground, awkward positions, strange noises, and endless discomfort gradually become normal. If you had described these sleeping conditions to your past self would have laughed, then politely declined, then gone home. Back in the modern world, many of us have developed highly specific bedtime requirements. The pillow must be correct. The blanket must be correct. The room temperature must be correct. Some people require complete darkness. Others require white noise. Others need a fan pointed at exactly the right angle, as though they are calibrating laboratory equipment. And yet, here you are, preparing to sleep on a patch of ground that appears to have lost an argument with a swamp. Human beings are astonishingly adaptable creatures. Eventually, the patrol stops for the evening. Equipment is checked. Positions are organized. Conversations become quieter. The fading light slips behind the trees, and darkness begins spreading through the jungle. The day has been long, very long. You've marched for hours, sweated continuously, carried enough equipment to qualify as a moving storage unit, battled mud, insects, heat, humidity, and rain. At this point, your body is no longer requesting sleep. It is issuing formal demands. The location you've selected for rest would not receive favorable reviews online. The ground is uneven. Roots protrude from the soil at uncomfortable angles. The air remains humid. Mosquitoes continue their ongoing negotiations with your skin. Strange sounds echo from the darkness beyond the trees. And yet, when you look at the spot, a thought enters your mind. Honestly, that doesn't seem too bad. This is how you know exhaustion has won. You spread out your gear, adjust your position, shift slightly, adjust again. Then accept that comfort is no longer part of the process. Military sleep often becomes less about quality and more about opportunity. If an opportunity to sleep appears, you take it immediately, without hesitation, without asking too many questions, because opportunities have a habit of disappearing. One of the strangest things about exhaustion is how quickly it rewrites your standards. A root pressing into your back? Manageable. A mosquito buzzing nearby? Acceptable. Rainwater dripping from a leaf? Could be worse. A mysterious noise coming from the jungle? Future. You can investigate that. Current you is busy sleeping. The jungle itself never truly becomes quiet. That's something many people don't realize. Nighttime doesn't reduce the noise. It changes it. The daytime chorus of birds gives way to insects, frogs, and countless unseen creatures conducting business in the darkness. The jungle hums, buzzes, clicks, rustles, whispers. Sometimes a distant call echoes through the trees. Sometimes a branch cracks somewhere beyond sight. The sounds can feel unsettling at first. Then gradually, they become background noise. Human beings can get used to almost anything, including sleeping beside what sounds suspiciously like a dinosaur having an argument with another dinosaur somewhere in the distance. The darkness itself feels different out here. Beneath the jungle canopy, night arrives with conviction. There are no city lights, no glowing windows, no illuminated parking lots, no comforting street lamps, just darkness, layer upon layer of darkness. The kind of darkness that makes you appreciate every flashlight ever invented. Yet despite all of this, people sleep. Not because conditions are ideal, because they're exhausted. The body has limits. Eventually, it collects its overdue payment. You notice soldiers falling asleep in positions that would alarm chiropractors everywhere, leaning against equipment, curled awkwardly beside packs, resting in positions that appear medically impossible. The remarkable thing is that they actually manage it. Some even snore, which feels wildly optimistic under the circumstances. Back home, a mattress company might spend millions trying to convince you their newest product provides superior sleep support. Meanwhile, someone nearby has fallen asleep using a backpack as a pillow and a poncho as a mattress. And somehow, they're doing fine, or at least fine enough, because out here, perfection isn't the goal. Recovery is. Even a few hours of rest become valuable. A chance to recharge, to recover, to briefly escape the endless cycle of marching, sweating, and adapting. Eventually, your eyes begin to close. The sounds of the jungle grow softer. Your muscles finally relax. The aches fade into the background. Tomorrow will bring more walking, more humidity, more mud, more uncertainty. But that's tomorrow's problem. For now, sleep arrives. Not comfortably, not elegantly, but effectively. And as you drift off beneath the dark jungle canopy, one sound remains ever present in the distance. A sound that has become part of life in Vietnam. A rhythmic chopping noise carried through the night air. The sound of helicopters. Few sounds became more recognizable during the war than helicopter rotors. Sometimes they brought supplies, sometimes transportation, sometimes rescue, sometimes trouble. Eventually, that distant chopping sound becomes part of the landscape itself. At first, you hear it before you see it, a faint rhythmic thumping somewhere beyond the trees. Thump, 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 almost like a giant heartbeat drifting across the jungle. The sound grows steadily louder, rolling through the humid air and echoing across valleys, rivers, and dense forests. Heads instinctively turn upward. Everyone listens. Because helicopters mean something. The question is what? Out here, the sound of a helicopter is never just background noise. It's information, possibility, movement. Maybe supplies are arriving. Maybe troops are moving. Maybe wounded soldiers are being evacuated. Maybe somebody somewhere is having a much worse day than you are. The Vietnam War became closely associated with helicopters for good reason. More than in previous conflicts, helicopters transformed how armies moved, supplied troops, and responded to rapidly changing situations. Dense jungle terrain often made traditional transportation difficult. Roads could disappear beneath mud. Rivers could become obstacles. But helicopters could simply fly over the problem, at least in theory. In practice, nothing in war is ever quite that simple. Still, when you're deep in the jungle, the sight of a helicopter can feel almost magical. After days of walking through endless green terrain, suddenly something appears overhead. A machine. A connection to the wider world. Proof that civilization still exists somewhere beyond the trees. The iconic helicopters of the war, particularly the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, better known as the Huey, became symbols of the conflict itself. Their distinctive rotor sound carried for miles. Veterans often recalled recognizing it instantly, even decades later. It's one of those sounds that imprints itself into memory, like an old song, or the ringtone of a phone you haven't owned in 20 years. The sound sticks. You watch as one approaches a clearing nearby. The rotors whip the air into chaos. Leaves swirl, dust rises, branches shake violently. The jungle suddenly looks as though it's being attacked by an invisible hurricane. The closer the helicopter gets, the louder everything becomes. Conversations vanish, thoughts disappear. The world reduces itself to wind and noise. It's difficult to appreciate just how powerful rotor wash can be until you're standing in it. Everything loose immediately attempts to leave. Hats, paper, equipment, your remaining dignity. Nothing is safe. You crouch slightly as the aircraft settles. The crew moves with practiced efficiency. Supplies come off. Messages are exchanged. People climb aboard. Others climb out. Everything happens quickly. There is a rhythm to it, a choreography developed through repetition. The helicopter rarely stays long. Time on the ground can be precious. Soon the rotors accelerate again. The aircraft rises. Dust and leaves erupt once more. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, it begins to disappear, lifting above the canopy, shrinking into the distance. The sound gradually fades. Thump, 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 until eventually the jungle swallows it. Silence returns. Well, jungle silence, which still contains approximately 12 million insects. But the helicopter's departure often leaves behind a strange feeling. For a few moments, the outside world touched your corner of the jungle. Then it moved on. The contrast can feel surprising. One moment, you're standing beside powerful machines capable of crossing vast distances in hours. The next, you're back to walking through mud, human civilization works in mysterious ways. Of course, helicopters weren't always associated with comfort or convenience. Sometimes they arrived under dangerous circumstances. Medical evacuation helicopters became especially important during the conflict. For wounded soldiers, the distant sound of approaching rotors could represent something profoundly important. A chance, a possibility, hope arriving from the sky. Medical crews often worked under extraordinarily difficult conditions, transporting casualties quickly from remote areas to hospitals and surgical facilities. The speed of these evacuations saved countless lives. It's one of the reasons helicopters became such an enduring symbol of the war. They carried many things: supplies, troops, equipment, but they also carried possibility. As darkness settles over the jungle once more, you hear another helicopter far away. Its rotor blades beat steadily against the night air. A familiar sound now, a sound you've begun to expect. The sound slowly fades into the distance, and as it disappears, another thought enters your mind. You've spent all day walking. You've survived the heat, the rain, the insects, the mud. Surely lunch must be an improvement. Unfortunately, lunch is waiting inside a can, and the can has some very disappointing news. Lunch introduces new culinary adventures: meat and beans, ham and lima beans, more beans, even more beans. Historians may disagree on many aspects of the Vietnam War, but nearly everyone agrees certain ration meals inspired deep emotional reactions. By midday, you've been walking for hours. The humidity has turned your uniform into a portable greenhouse. Your boots have collected enough mud to qualify as agricultural equipment. The jungle has scratched, soaked, bitten, and generally inconvenienced you since sunrise. Naturally, your body begins thinking about food. Specifically, real food. A cheeseburger, a bowl of soup, a fresh sandwich, maybe even something as simple as toast. It's remarkable how exciting toast becomes when you haven't seen any for a while. Instead, lunch arrives in a cardboard box. Again, welcome back to the world of sea rations. You settle onto a fallen log, a patch of dry ground, or whatever object currently looks least likely to collapse beneath you. Around you, other soldiers are doing the same. It's lunchtime, which means it's time for another round of military culinary roulette. You open your ration box and immediately begin inventory. The main can, the crackers, the spread, the powdered drink, the accessories. It's less like preparing lunch and more like assembling evidence for a courtroom case. Everyone starts examining their selections. This is where one of humanity's oldest traditions emerges: trading. Trading exists in every society. Ancient civilizations traded spices. Nations trade resources. Soldiers trade lunch, particularly if somebody receives one of the less popular menu options. Anybody want to trade? The question echoes through military history. Someone always asks. Someone always hopes. Occasionally, someone gets lucky. The famous ham and lima beans meal quickly developed a reputation among many troops. The meal was perfectly edible. It provided nutrition. It fulfilled its purpose. Unfortunately, fulfilling its purpose and being beloved are two very different achievements. Many soldiers spent considerable energy attempting to exchange it for almost anything else. The can itself becomes part of the ritual. You pry it open, peer inside, and attempt to identify the contents. Sometimes this process is straightforward. Sometimes it feels like archaeological research. The food often arrives packed in gravy, sauce, or some mysterious liquid whose intentions remain unclear. You stare. The food stares back. Eventually, hunger wins. It usually does. That's one thing the jungle teaches quickly. After enough walking, almost anything becomes food. Not delicious food, not memorable food, just food. And food is valuable. You take a bite, it's not terrible, It's not wonderful, it simply exists, which, in fairness, is exactly what military planners intended. Sea rations weren't designed to impress restaurant critics. They were designed to survive transport, storage, heat, humidity, rough handling, and long deployments. In that regard, they were remarkably successful. Some cans seem capable of surviving several geological eras. If archaeologists discovered one 1,000 years later, there's a reasonable chance it would still be warm. The crackers deserve special mention. These crackers possess extraordinary durability. They're less of a snack and more of a structural material. You might suspect they could reinforce bridges, perhaps fortify small buildings. In an emergency, they could probably stop incoming weather systems. Yet somehow, after hours in the jungle, they taste wonderful. Not because they're exceptional, but because you're hungry. Hunger is the greatest chef in human history. The powdered drink packets provide additional excitement. With enough water and optimism, they become beverages. Sometimes fruit-flavored, sometimes coffee-flavored, sometimes simply flavored. The exact results vary. Nobody expects luxury anymore. Luxury left several thousand miles ago. What remains is practicality, and practicality can be surprisingly comforting. As lunch continues, conversations drift across the group. Stories from home, rumors, complaints about the weather, complaints about the food, more complaints about the weather, a surprising number of complaints about the weather. Someone starts describing their favorite meal back home. This is a mistake. Within minutes, everyone is discussing food. Steaks, pizza, ice cream, fresh bread, cold drinks. Entire imaginary menus begin forming. It's essentially group torture, but nobody stops. The more unavailable something becomes, the more fascinating it sounds. A cold soda starts sounding like a religious experience. A fresh hamburger becomes a mythical object. A milkshake practically achieves legendary status. The jungle has a way of simplifying priorities. By the end of lunch, the cans are packed away. The conversations fade. People stand, stretch, and prepare to move again. Nobody feels particularly full. Nobody feels particularly satisfied. But everyone has fuel for the next part of the day. And out here, that's enough. You wipe your hands, adjust your gear, take one last sip from your canteen. The jungle waits patiently around you. The heat is already building again, and as you rise to continue the patrol, you're about to receive a reminder that Vietnam never really lets you get comfortable. Because now the temperature is climbing, and nature is preparing another lesson. This one arrives in the form of heat exhaustion. Then comes one of the most important moments of the day. Mail. A simple letter suddenly becomes more valuable than almost anything else. For a few minutes, the jungle disappears and home feels a little closer. It's a strange thing. You've spent days surrounded by equipment worth thousands of dollars. Helicopters fly overhead. Radios connect units across vast distances. Military operations involve enormous amounts of planning, logistics, and manpower. And yet the object everyone gets excited about is a folded piece of paper. A letter. Not because it is complicated, because it is personal. The news spreads quickly. Mail has arrived. Instantly, people become interested. Very interested. The same exhausted soldiers who spent the morning dragging themselves through heat, mud, and humidity suddenly find a little extra energy. Human beings are funny that way. Tell someone they need to carry another 50 pounds of equipment and they will groan. Tell them there is a letter waiting and they will practically jog. You find yourself hoping. Maybe there is one for you. Maybe there is not. That is always the difficult part. Waiting. Watching names being called. listening carefully, trying not to look too eager. Everyone looks eager. Nobody is fooling anyone. When your name finally appears on an envelope, something shifts. For a moment, the jungle fades. The heat fades. The mosquitoes fade. Even the endless walking fades. All that exists is that small piece of paper. You sit down somewhere quiet and look at the handwriting. Maybe it is from your parents, maybe a spouse, maybe a sibling, maybe a friend. The familiar handwriting alone can feel comforting. A tiny piece of home somehow transported thousands of miles across oceans and continents. It is remarkable when you think about it. The letter traveled farther than most people in history ever did, and now it is sitting in your hands. You unfold it carefully, not because the paper is fragile, because the moment is. The first few lines immediately transport you elsewhere. Suddenly, you're not in Vietnam anymore. You're back home, back on familiar streets, back at familiar tables, back among familiar people. The writer tells you about ordinary things. A neighbor bought a new car. The dog got into trouble again. Your little brother finally learned how to drive. Your favorite restaurant is still there. Someone painted their house. The local baseball team is losing. Again. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing dramatic. And that's exactly why it matters. Normal life becomes precious when you're far away from it. The ordinary transforms into luxury. You realize you've never been so interested in somebody else's grocery shopping story. Tell me more about the new curtains. Explain exactly what happened at the church picnic. I need every detail about Uncle Frank's barbecue disaster. The smaller the story, the better. Because small stories mean life is continuing. The world keeps turning. Home still exists. It's waiting. Letters also have a funny way of distorting time. The person writing may have put pen to paper weeks ago. The events they're describing have already happened. The weather they mention has changed. The game they discuss is over. The birthday has come and gone. And yet, for you, it's all happening right now. The letter creates a tiny bridge across distance. A conversation stretched across weeks. Not instant, not convenient, but meaningful. Sometimes letters contain photographs. Those become treasures. You study them carefully, longer than you normally would. A family picture, a snapshot of friends, a familiar house, a pet. Simple images suddenly become powerful. You notice every detail, the clothes people are wearing, the expressions on their faces, the background, the weather. You look at the same photograph repeatedly, each time discovering something new. Around you, other soldiers are doing exactly the same thing. Reading, smiling, laughing quietly, sometimes becoming thoughtful, sometimes becoming emotional. Nobody judges. Everyone understands. Because everybody misses someone. Everybody misses somewhere. That's one of the few universal experiences in the jungle. Of course, not every letter contains good news. Life doesn't pause simply because you're far away. People still face problems. Things still happen. But even difficult news can feel valuable. At least you're connected. At least you know. At least for a few moments, you're part of the world beyond the trees. Eventually, the letter ends. You reach the final line, the final signature, the final goodbye. And for a moment, you just sit there, reading it again, then maybe a third time, carefully folding it, tucking it away somewhere safe. Not because it's important military equipment, because it's important to you. The jungle returns gradually. The sounds come back. The heat comes back. The insects come back. Reality resumes. But something has changed. The day feels a little lighter. The pack feels a little less heavy. The distance feels a little less impossible. All because of a few pages written by someone who cared enough to sit down and write. You stand, adjust your gear, take one last look at the envelope, and prepare to continue. Because the jungle has a peculiar relationship with time. Long stretches of waiting, brief moments of activity, then more waiting, which means it's time to learn one of the strangest skills of military life, the art of doing absolutely nothing while remaining completely ready for everything. War often involves long stretches of waiting, waiting for orders, waiting for transportation, waiting for information, waiting for something to happen. Human beings are surprisingly bad at waiting, especially when they are nervous. If you asked most people to imagine military life, they would probably picture constant action, movement, decisions, excitement, urgency. The reality is often very different. Many days contain long stretches where absolutely nothing happens. And somehow, those stretches can be exhausting. You find yourself sitting beneath a tree somewhere deep in the Vietnamese jungle. Your equipment is nearby. Your weapon is nearby. Everyone remains alert. But for the moment, there is no immediate task, no patrol to conduct, no trail to follow, no objective demanding attention, just waiting. The first few minutes seem pleasant enough. A chance to rest, a chance to drink water, a chance to let your shoulders recover from carrying your pack all day. You welcome it. Your back welcomes it. Your feet practically throw a celebration. Then 10 minutes pass. Then 20. Then 40. Soon you begin discovering one of the great truths of military life. Waiting is work. Different work, but work nonetheless. Because you are never truly relaxing, not completely. Part of your mind remains switched on. Listening, watching, paying attention, ready to move if necessary. It's like trying to take a nap while expecting someone to ring your doorbell at any moment. You can rest, sort of, but your brain never fully powers down. The jungle doesn't help. The sounds continue endlessly. Insects buzz, birds call, leaves rustle. Something splashes somewhere in the distance. Something else crashes through the undergrowth. You spend several minutes wondering what made the noise, then eventually decide you probably don't want to know. The longer you wait, the stranger your thoughts become. This is unavoidable. Human beings were not designed to sit quietly for extended periods without entertainment. Modern people solve this problem with phones, social media, streaming services, podcasts, videos about medieval bread making that somehow receive 12 million views. You have none of those. Instead, you have your imagination. This turns out to be both a blessing and a curse. Your thoughts drift. You remember conversations from years ago. You suddenly wonder what happened to your third grade teacher. You think about food. Again. You always think about food. Somewhere in the world, a hamburger exists. And somehow that feels important. The conversations that develop during these periods of waiting can be fascinating or completely ridiculous, often both. One person starts talking about home. Someone else remembers a favorite restaurant. Another begins describing a car they plan to buy someday. Within minutes, an entire discussion develops around topics that have absolutely nothing to do with the jungle. And that's the point. For a little while, everyone gets to mentally leave. Not physically, just mentally. The jungle remains exactly where it is, but your mind visits home. Veterans often remembered these quiet moments surprisingly well. Not because they were dramatic, because they were human. The conversations, the jokes, the stories, the shared boredom. Sometimes people play cards. Sometimes they clean equipment. Sometimes they write letters. Sometimes they simply sit quietly and stare into the distance. Thinking, waiting, existing. There is something oddly universal about waiting. Everyone has done it. Waiting at airports, waiting in traffic, waiting at doctors' offices, waiting for important news. The difference here is that uncertainty hangs over everything. You don't know when the waiting will end, only that eventually it will. At some point, somebody receives new instructions. Word spreads. The break is ending. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changes. The strange thing is that nobody seems surprised. Everyone has been expecting it. That's the nature of waiting. You spend hours preparing for a moment that arrives without warning. People stand, stretch, collect their gear, check their equipment. Conversations fade. The little temporary world that existed beneath the trees begins disappearing. Just as quickly as it formed. You shoulder your pack once again. Your spine immediately objects, loudly. The brief comfort is over. The patrol reforms. The jungle waits patiently around you. As always, you take your place and prepare to move, because the waiting is finished. For now, the day is beginning to fade. The shadows are growing longer, and ahead lies something every soldier eventually learns about Vietnam. The jungle feels completely different after dark. As evening arrives, the jungle changes personality. Familiar sounds disappear. New sounds emerge. Every rustle suddenly feels significant. Darkness transforms ordinary uncertainty into something much larger. The transition begins slowly. The sun sinks lower. The shadows stretch longer. The golden afternoon light filtering through the canopy starts to fade. For a brief moment, the jungle is beautiful, almost peaceful. The leaves glow softly in the dying sunlight. The air cools ever so slightly. The endless green landscape seems gentler somehow. You might even find yourself thinking the evening isn't so bad. The jungle hears this thought and immediately prepares a response. Because once darkness begins arriving, everything changes. Back home, night usually comes with reassurance. Street lights flicker on. Porch lights glow. Car headlights move through the distance. Cities and towns push back against the darkness with electricity. Night becomes something manageable, controlled, predictable. The jungle has no interest in being predictable. The last rays of sunlight vanish behind the trees, and suddenly the world begins shrinking. Your vision narrows. The distance you can clearly see grows shorter. The familiar landscape you've spent all day walking through starts dissolving into shadows. Trees become silhouettes. Bushes become shapes. Shapes become questions. And the jungle contains an endless number of questions. During the day, you could at least see most of what surrounded you. At night, imagination fills the gaps. Human beings are remarkably talented at imagining things hiding in darkness, especially when there is actual darkness, actual hiding places, and actual reasons to be cautious. The jungle provides all three. As visibility fades, your other senses immediately start working overtime. You listen more carefully. You notice sounds you ignored during the day, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant croaking of frogs, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere beyond sight. Every sound suddenly feels important, not because it necessarily is, but because it might be. That's the challenge, the uncertainty. You hear something moving in the darkness. Maybe it's a bird, maybe it's a monkey, maybe it's a wild pig, maybe it's something else entirely. The problem is that you can't immediately tell. The jungle rarely provides subtitles. The night sounds themselves can be astonishing. Insects create an endless wall of noise. Frogs contribute their opinions. Unseen animals call to one another from distant trees. Some sounds are familiar, many are not. The jungle becomes a vast nighttime orchestra conducted by creatures you've never seen. And some of those sounds are genuinely strange. You hear calls that resemble whistles, others that sound like screams. Some resemble laughter. Others sound suspiciously like someone stepping on a squeaky toy. The first time you hear certain jungle noises, they're deeply unsettling. The 10th time, they're merely annoying. The 100th time, they're background music. Adaptation is one of humanity's greatest talents. The darkness affects movement too. Everything slows down. Every step requires more attention. Every trail becomes harder to follow. Every obstacle becomes more dangerous. That route you easily stepped over this afternoon? It's now waiting patiently to launch you face first into the ground. The route remains committed to the cause. Darkness gives it an advantage. Around camp, small lights are used carefully when needed. Voices become quieter. Movements become more deliberate. The atmosphere changes, not necessarily fearful, just focused. The night demands attention. One thing that surprises many people is how exhausting darkness can be. Not physically, mentally. Your brain spends hours processing incomplete information, shapes, sounds, movements, possibilities. It's constantly working, constantly interpreting, constantly asking questions. Most of those questions never receive answers. Eventually, you stop asking, or at least ask less frequently. You sit quietly for a moment and look out into the darkness. The jungle stretches beyond sight in every direction. Millions of leaves, thousands of trees, countless creatures moving through the night. An entire world continuing its business while you watch from a small patch of ground. It's humbling, beautiful in a strange way, and just a little unsettling. The stars occasionally appear through gaps in the canopy overhead, tiny reminders that somewhere beyond the humidity, the insects, the mud, and the darkness, the larger world still exists. The same stars shine over home, over familiar streets, over people sleeping peacefully in comfortable beds. A comforting thought. Until a mosquito lands on your neck. The jungle is very good at keeping you present. As the night deepens, conversations fade. The sounds of the forest continue. The darkness grows thicker. And somewhere beneath your feet lies a reality many soldiers never fully appreciated at first. Because while you are watching the trees, the shadows, and the darkness above ground, an entirely different world exists below it, a hidden world of tunnels. While you're watching the surface, entire hidden worlds exist underground. Vast tunnel systems challenge assumptions about where danger can come from. It's a reminder that this conflict often operates according to rules nobody fully understands. As night settles over the jungle, it's easy to assume you've accounted for most of your surroundings. The trees, the trails, the rivers, the hills, the darkness, the sounds. Everything appears to exist in front of you or above you. That's how human beings naturally think about the world. We focus on what we can see. The Vietnam War had a habit of reminding people that visibility and understanding are not the same thing. Because beneath the soil, beneath the roots, beneath the jungle floor itself, entire tunnel networks stretch through parts of the countryside. Hidden, concealed, often completely invisible from the surface. You could stand directly above one and never know it existed, which is a deeply unsettling thought, particularly when you're already surrounded by a jungle that appears determined to keep secrets. The most famous of these systems were the tunnel complexes developed and expanded by Viet Cong forces over many years. Some tunnel networks became extraordinarily extensive, connecting living areas, storage rooms, meeting spaces, medical facilities, supply caches, and defensive positions. From above, you might see nothing more than ordinary jungle. Below, an entirely different world could exist. It's one of the reasons this conflict often felt so different from conventional wars. The battlefield wasn't always where you expected it to be. Imagine spending an entire day carefully watching the trees around you, only to discover that part of the landscape has been quietly operating underneath you the entire time. History occasionally produces situations that sound fictional. This is one of them. The entrances themselves were often designed to be difficult to detect. Small, concealed, camouflaged, blended into the surrounding terrain. A patch of leaves, a section of ground, a seemingly ordinary part of the jungle. The jungle was already good at hiding things. The tunnels simply took that principle to another level. You find yourself looking down at the ground differently. The earth no longer feels entirely solid. Not physically, psychologically. You become aware that there are layers to this environment. Visible layers, invisible layers, known layers, unknown layers. And human beings generally prefer fewer unknown layers. One is usually plenty. Historically, these tunnel systems served many purposes. They allowed movement, communication, storage, and concealment. Some sections were relatively simple. Others became remarkably sophisticated, considering the conditions under which they were built. Ventilation systems, storage areas, meeting rooms, escape routes. Entire underground communities sometimes operated within these networks. The engineering involved could be impressive, especially when you consider the circumstances. Back home, people complain when construction projects take too long. Here, people were creating hidden tunnel systems beneath active war zones. Human determination is a fascinating thing. Of course, the tunnels were not comfortable places. Far from it. Dark, confined, hot, humid, often incredibly cramped. Many sections were intentionally narrow. This served practical purposes, but it also meant that moving through them required a level of composure most people would struggle to maintain. If you've ever felt uncomfortable in a crowded elevator, imagine discovering that the elevator extends underground for miles and contains significantly fewer reassuring safety inspections. Suddenly, the elevator seems wonderful. You begin appreciating elevators. You may even miss elevators. The very existence of the tunnels created a unique psychological challenge. It's difficult to feel entirely certain about your surroundings when you know there are things you cannot see. The jungle already encouraged caution. The tunnels added another layer, another question, another uncertainty. And uncertainty, as you've learned, is one of the most persistent companions in Vietnam. Yet the tunnels also reveal something important about the conflict itself. Adaptation, innovation, resourcefulness. Throughout history, people facing difficult circumstances have found creative ways to survive, resist, communicate, and endure. The tunnel systems became one example of that reality. A reminder that wars are not only contests of weapons and equipment, they are contests of ingenuity, of persistence, of finding solutions where none appear to exist. As you sit beneath the dark canopy, listening to the sounds of the jungle around you, it's strange to think about how much activity might exist beyond sight. Above ground, below ground, near, far, visible, invisible. The jungle contains layers upon layers of hidden stories. Most remain unseen, some remain undiscovered, and many remain difficult to fully comprehend even decades later. Eventually, your thoughts return to the immediate world around you, the ground beneath your boots, the darkness beyond the trees, the humid night air pressing gently against your skin. You take a slow breath. The jungle remains quiet, or at least quiet by jungle standards, which means thousands of insects are still conducting business. Then another thought arrives. Because hidden tunnels are not the only things capable of turning an ordinary path into a dangerous one. The jungle has another unpleasant surprise waiting, one that does not require an entire underground network. Sometimes all it takes is a single step and a trap you never saw coming. Not every threat announces itself. Sometimes danger waits quietly. The psychological effect is enormous. You begin paying attention to every step, every path, and every object that looks even slightly out of place. By now, you've spent enough time in the jungle to understand a simple truth. The obvious dangers are often the easiest to handle. If a tree blocks the path, you can see it. If rain is coming, you can usually hear it. If a mosquito wants your blood, it practically sends a formal notification. Booby traps operate according to an entirely different philosophy. Their entire purpose is to remain unnoticed, which, from a psychological perspective, is deeply rude. You continue along the trail, moving carefully through the dense vegetation. The path ahead appears ordinary. The ground looks normal. The leaves look normal. The branches look normal. Everything looks normal. And that's exactly the problem, because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the jungle looks exactly like the jungle. The Vietnam War saw the use of many different types of traps designed to slow movement, create injuries, generate caution, and force soldiers to constantly remain alert. Some were mechanically complex. Others were remarkably simple. History occasionally demonstrates that simplicity can be surprisingly effective. A concealed pit, a hidden wire, a disguised mechanism, things that might appear insignificant until the moment they aren't. The psychological impact extended far beyond the physical danger. Because once you know traps exist, every path becomes a question. Every trail becomes a possibility. Every unusual object attracts attention. You find yourself studying the ground with newfound respect. The jungle already demanded observation. Now it demands even more. A branch lying across a path. Why is it there? A patch of disturbed soil. What happened there? A section of vegetation that looks slightly different. Different how? You become an amateur detective. The clues are usually nothing, but usually isn't always. And that's enough to keep your mind working overtime. The strange thing is that the jungle itself starts looking suspicious. Not one part of it, all of it. The entire environment becomes guilty until proven innocent. That bush, questionable. That tree, potentially suspicious. That innocent-looking pile of leaves, absolutely not to be trusted. You know rationally that most leaves are simply leaves, but after enough time, rationality begins negotiating with experience. Experience usually wins. The result is a level of caution that can be mentally exhausting. Every step receives attention. Every movement is deliberate. The ground beneath your boots transforms from scenery into information. Back home, people rarely spend much time analyzing sidewalks. You walk, you arrive. The sidewalk performs its duties admirably. The relationship is simple. Vietnam's jungle trails offer a much more complicated arrangement. Here, the ground has personality, and that personality is occasionally hostile. The patrol advances carefully, slowly, methodically. People watch one another, communicate quietly, pay attention to details. Nobody wants to rush. Rushing is rarely rewarded. Patience becomes one of the most valuable skills you possess. It's not exciting. It won't appear in heroic paintings. Nobody writes epic poems about moving cautiously, yet caution saves an astonishing amount of trouble. The tension builds gradually. Not panic, not fear. Awareness. A constant awareness humming quietly beneath everything else. You carry it with you the same way you carry your pack, the same way you carry exhaustion, the same way you carry the humidity. It becomes part of daily life, part of the environment, part of the routine. And like many routines, it eventually starts feeling normal, or at least normal enough. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. Given enough time, we can adjust to almost anything, even circumstances that would have seemed impossible a few months earlier. You stop being surprised by your own vigilance. You stop noticing how often you're scanning the ground. You stop noticing how often you're evaluating your surroundings. The behavior becomes automatic. A habit. A survival habit. The jungle teaches many lessons. Some are physical, some are emotional, many are practical. This lesson is simple. Pay attention, always, because surprises rarely improve your day. As afternoon slowly fades toward evening, the patrol continues forward, one careful step after another. The trail winds through the trees. The air remains warm. The insects remain committed to their profession, and everyone keeps moving. Watching, listening, thinking. Yet amid all this caution and uncertainty, one reassuring reality exists. No matter how difficult conditions become, there are people whose entire purpose is helping when things go wrong. People who run toward problems instead of away from them. People carrying something far more important than equipment. Because next, it is time to meet the medics performing miracles in the jungle. Amid the chaos, are medics and medical teams performing astonishing work under impossible conditions. Their speed, skill, and calmness save countless lives. They are often carrying something heavier than equipment: responsibility. By now, you've learned that the jungle has an endless supply of unpleasant surprises. Heat, humidity, mud, insects, exhaustion, uncertainty. Every day seems determined to invent a new way to test human patience. And occasionally, despite everyone's best efforts, things go wrong. When they do, a different kind of courage steps forward. Not the dramatic movie version, not the kind accompanied by triumphant music, the quieter kind, the kind that shows up when someone needs help. You might be resting after a long patrol when the call comes, or moving through the jungle, or eating another unforgettable ration meal, the situation changes instantly. The mood changes instantly. And suddenly, all eyes turn toward the people trained to respond, the medics. Throughout the Vietnam War, combat medics occupied one of the most demanding roles imaginable. They moved alongside troops, often under the same difficult conditions, carrying medical equipment and treating injuries wherever they occurred. The jungle did not provide ideal working conditions. Quite the opposite. Imagine trying to perform complex medical tasks while surrounded by heat, humidity, mud, rain, insects, darkness, uneven ground, and the general chaos of a tropical environment. Most people struggle to apply a bandage correctly after reading the instructions twice. These individuals were expected to remain calm under extraordinary pressure, and remarkably often, they did. One of the first things you notice is speed. Everything happens quickly. Someone calls for help. A medic moves. Equipment appears. Decisions are made. Training takes over. The hesitation that affects most people during emergencies is replaced by action. Because emergencies are not particularly interested in waiting. The medic does not have the luxury of standing around wondering what to do. The situation requires movement. Now, it is one of the most impressive things about highly trained professionals. They continue functioning while everyone else is still processing what happened. You watch them work, focused, efficient, calm, not because they are not human, because panic is not useful. The jungle already contains enough problems. Adding panic would simply create another one. Historically, medical care during the Vietnam War benefited from important advances in evacuation and treatment. Helicopter medical evacuations often allowed wounded personnel to reach advanced care far more quickly than in many earlier conflicts. This saved lives. A lot of lives. The famous sound of approaching helicopter rotors carried a special meaning for many people. Hope. Not guaranteed hope, but hope nonetheless. And hope can be a powerful thing. You begin to appreciate how much responsibility these medical teams carried. They are not just treating injuries. They are carrying expectations, trust, responsibility, other people's futures. That is a heavy load, possibly heavier than your backpack. And unlike your backpack, it does not come off at the end of the day. The emotional weight remains. One of the remarkable things about military medicine is that much of the work involves preparation, checking equipment, organizing supplies, reviewing procedures, thinking ahead. The better prepared you are before an emergency, the more effectively you can respond during one. It's not very glamorous, but neither is most important work. History often remembers dramatic moments. What it sometimes forgets is the preparation behind them, the countless hours spent learning skills, practicing procedures, making mistakes during training so fewer mistakes happen later. The quiet work that allows people to perform under pressure. Around camp, medics are often treated with a special kind of respect. Not because they're superheroes, because they're dependable. And dependability becomes incredibly valuable in difficult places. When conditions are uncertain, dependable people feel like anchors, steady, reliable, present, the kind of people you hope never become necessary, but are very glad to see when they are. As evening settles over the jungle, you watch people cleaning equipment, organizing supplies, and preparing for another day. The medics are doing the same, getting ready. checking everything, preparing for circumstances they hope won't happen. It's not glamorous work. It's essential work. And there's a difference. The jungle grows quieter as darkness approaches. Or at least quieter by jungle standards, which still includes enough insect noise to power a small orchestra. You settle back for a moment and reflect on the people around you. The soldiers, the pilots, the crews, the medics. Everyone performing their role within an enormous and complicated conflict. And then another thought occurs. Because while you're living this experience deep in the jungle, millions of people back home are experiencing a very different version of the same war. One through television screens, one through newspapers, one through evening broadcasts. A war happening thousands of miles away, yet somehow appearing every night in living rooms across America. And that changes everything. Back home, millions watch pieces of the war through television broadcasts. For one of the first times in history, distant events enter living rooms with unprecedented speed. The conflict is happening in two places at once. As you sit in the jungle, surrounded by heat, insects, and the endless sounds of the night, it's easy to forget that people thousands of miles away are thinking about the same war. Not living it, not walking through it, not sweating through it, but watching it. And that's something relatively new in human history. For most of history, wars traveled slowly. News moved at the speed of horses, ships, messengers, letters. By the time people learned about a battle, the battle had often ended weeks earlier, sometimes months earlier. Ancient kings occasionally won entire wars before some of their subjects even knew the fighting had begun. Communication was not exactly known for efficiency. The 20th century changed all that. Radio accelerated information. Newspapers expanded coverage. Then, television arrived and completely transformed the relationship between distant events and ordinary people. For many Americans, Vietnam became the first war they experienced through moving images appearing nightly in their homes. Imagine that for a moment. You're eating dinner, sitting in your living room. The kids are finishing homework. Someone is washing dishes. The dog is asleep on the floor. Then the evening news begins. Suddenly, images from the other side of the world appear on the screen. Jungles, helicopters, soldiers, villages, battles. A conflict unfolding thousands of miles away somehow enters the room. The distance remains enormous, but psychologically, it feels smaller, much smaller. Of course, television could never show everything. No camera can capture an entire war. No broadcast can summarize millions of experiences. What viewers saw were fragments, important fragments, powerful fragments, but fragments nonetheless. Meanwhile, you remain in the jungle, living an experience that cannot fit neatly between commercial breaks. The humidity does not pause when the news segment ends. The mosquitoes do not stop buzzing because the program returns to the studio. Reality continues regardless of the broadcast schedule. Yet television changes something fundamental. For the first time, large numbers of people can regularly see images of an ongoing conflict while it is still happening. The war becomes part of daily conversation, part of politics, part of public debate, part of family discussions around dinner tables. One person watches the news and forms an opinion. Another disagrees. A conversation begins, then another, then thousands more. The war exists not only in Vietnam, but also in newspapers, broadcasts, political speeches, classrooms, workplaces, and homes. It is as though the conflict develops a second life, one physical, one informational, both real, both influential, but not always identical. Back home, someone might spend 10 minutes watching a report about a patrol, then continue with their evening. Perhaps they watch a game show. Perhaps they read a book. Perhaps they go to bed. For them, the story pauses. For you, it does not. You wake up in it, walk through it, eat lunch in it, sleep beside it. The contrast is striking. Neither perspective is complete on its own. Together, they form part of a larger picture. One of the most fascinating aspects of television coverage is how it changes public expectations. People can now see events more directly than previous generations. They want information faster, more frequently, more vividly. The relationship between government, media, and public opinion becomes increasingly complicated. Human beings have always debated important events. Television simply gives everyone more material to debate. And humans, as history repeatedly demonstrates, absolutely love debating things, particularly things they only partially understand. This is one of our oldest traditions. The evening news eventually ends. The television screen goes dark. Families head to bed. The broadcast becomes tomorrow's old news. But in Vietnam, the jungle remains awake. The insects continue singing. The humidity continues existing far more enthusiastically than necessary. The patrols continue. The waiting continues. The uncertainty continues. Life goes on. And amid all the military operations, political discussions, and television coverage, it is easy to forget something important. Millions of Vietnamese civilians are living through all of this too. Not as observers, not as commentators, not as people changing channels, as people whose homes, families, communities, and daily lives exist within the conflict itself. And their story is just as important. It's easy to forget that beyond military operations are millions of Vietnamese civilians living ordinary lives amid extraordinary circumstances. Families still work, cook, travel, worry, and endure while history unfolds around them. When people talk about wars, they often focus on armies. Generals, battles, strategies, maps covered with arrows pointing in dramatic directions. History books love arrows. The arrows move, the armies move, the chapters move, and sometimes the people already living there quietly fade into the background. But they were never in the background. They were at the center of it all. As you move through Vietnam, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just a battlefield. It's someone's home. Actually, millions of someone's homes. Long before soldiers arrived, long before journalists arrived, long before politicians began debating policies on the other side of the world, people were already living here, raising families, growing crops, running businesses, attending school, celebrating weddings, arguing with neighbors, complaining about the weather. In other words, doing all the things people have always done. History has a habit of focusing on extraordinary events. Most human beings spend their lives focused on ordinary ones. And sometimes those ordinary lives continue even when extraordinary events arrive. You pass villages where people are still working. Farmers tend fields. Merchants sell goods. Children play. Families cook meals. The routines of life persist. Not because circumstances are easy, because life must continue somehow. One of the remarkable things about human beings is our ability to normalize almost anything. Not immediately, not happily, but eventually. People adapt because they have no choice. The alternative is simply stopping. And most people keep going. Throughout the conflict, Vietnamese civilians experienced immense disruption and hardship. Communities found themselves caught between larger forces far beyond their control. This is often the hidden reality of war. The people making decisions are rarely the same people living beside the consequences. A farmer wakes up worrying about crops. A parent worries about children. A shopkeeper worries about business. These concerns don't disappear simply because history decides to become dramatic. In fact, they often become more important. The challenge of everyday life remains. Only now it's accompanied by uncertainty. Imagine trying to plan next week's harvest when you're not entirely sure what next week will look like. Imagine trying to raise children while the world around you keeps changing. Imagine trying to preserve a sense of normal life when normal itself has become difficult to define. These aren't military challenges, they're human challenges, and they can be incredibly difficult. As you travel through the countryside, you begin noticing something else. Resilience. Not the loud kind, not the heroic movie version, the quieter kind. The kind that wakes up every morning and continues. The kind that plants crops because crops still need planting. The kind that cooks dinner because people still need dinner. The kind that repairs roofs because rain remains stubbornly committed to falling. History is filled with grand speeches about courage. Often, the greatest courage looks much simpler. It looks like ordinary people refusing to give up on ordinary life. A child still goes to school. A family still gathers for a meal. A community still celebrates a holiday. These moments rarely become famous, yet they matter enormously because they remind everyone that life is larger than conflict. Human beings are more than the wars surrounding them. You see this everywhere. People helping one another, sharing resources, supporting families, maintaining traditions, trying to preserve pieces of normality amid uncertainty. The details vary. The instinct remains familiar. If you've ever helped a neighbor, checked on a friend, brought food to someone having a difficult week, you've participated in the same impulse, the desire to take care of one another. That impulse survives almost everything, even war, perhaps especially war. As evening settles across the countryside, cooking fires begin appearing in villages. Families gather together. Conversations continue. Meals are shared. Children laugh. Dogs bark. Life moves forward. Not because circumstances are perfect, because tomorrow is coming, and people have responsibilities waiting for them. The more time you spend thinking about history, the more you realize something important. Most people never wanted to become part of historical events. They simply wanted to live their lives. History arrived anyway, and somehow, they endured it. You continue your journey through the fading light, reflecting on the countless lives unfolding around you. Lives that rarely receive entire chapters in textbooks. Lives that matter nonetheless. Perhaps the most human part of the entire story. And despite all the hardship, uncertainty, and difficulty, one thing continues appearing wherever people gather. Something surprisingly powerful. something capable of surviving even the most uncomfortable circumstances. Humor. Because if human beings can still laugh, they can usually keep going. And out here, laughter might be more important than anyone realizes. Human beings possess a remarkable survival mechanism: jokes. Even during difficult circumstances, people find ways to laugh. Sometimes the humor is dark, sometimes absurd, sometimes completely ridiculous. Often that's exactly why it works. After enough days in the jungle, you begin to understand a simple truth. Nobody can stay serious all the time. Not in this heat, not in this humidity, not while wearing clothes that have been damp since approximately the invention of agriculture. Eventually, something has to give. And fortunately for human civilization, what usually gives is dignity. Not morale. Dignity. The first thing you notice is that soldiers joke about everything. The weather, the food, the mud, the mosquitoes, the rain, the equipment, the jungle, the fact that the jungle appears to contain more mosquitoes than actual leaves. Nothing is safe. If something exists, someone will eventually make a joke about it. And honestly, that's probably healthy. Because many of the alternatives are significantly less fun. You're sitting with a group during a short break when somebody looks down at their boots. The boots are covered in mud. The pants are covered in mud. The person inside the boots is also covered in mud. Someone comments that they've become one with the local environment. The group laughs. Not because it's especially clever, because it's true. The best military humor often works this way. Simple, accurate, slightly ridiculous. The jungle provides endless material. For example, everybody complains about the rain. Then everybody complains when it stops raining. Because once the rain stops, the heat becomes unbearable. Then they complain about the heat. Then they complain about the humidity. Then they complain that the humidity feels hotter than the heat. Eventually, someone points out that they're essentially arguing about different types of discomfort. This observation changes absolutely nothing. The complaints continue. Human beings are committed to tradition. One of the strangest things about humor is how it changes perspective. A miserable situation remains miserable, but somehow it becomes more manageable. A terrible meal becomes a funny story. An exhausting patrol becomes a joke. A disaster becomes an anecdote. History is full of examples of people laughing in circumstances that seem completely inappropriate, until you realize the laughter is helping them cope. Then it makes perfect sense. You discover that boredom generates some of the most creative humor imaginable. Remember all those hours spent waiting? Well, the human brain dislikes boredom almost as much as it dislikes uncertainty, so it starts inventing entertainment. Conversations drift into absurd territory. Debates emerge over entirely meaningless topics. Someone asks a ridiculous question, and then everyone spends the next hour arguing about it. Could a mosquito carry a backpack? Would a helicopter win a fight against 1,000 angry monkeys? How many sea ration crackers would it take to build a house? The answer to that last one appears to be fewer than expected. Nobody knows why these discussions happen. They simply do, and somehow they're wonderful. For a little while, everyone stops thinking about the jungle, stops thinking about tomorrow, stops thinking about uncertainty. They are just talking, laughing, being human. Nicknames are another tradition. Military units have always loved nicknames. People receive them for all sorts of reasons. A funny mistake, a memorable moment, an unfortunate haircut, an encounter with mud, many encounters with mud. Sometimes the nickname makes perfect sense. Sometimes it makes no sense whatsoever. The less sense it makes, the longer it usually survives. Nobody remembers how it started. Everyone remembers the nickname. That's the rule. The humor can become surprisingly sophisticated too. Sarcasm flourishes. Dry observations flourish. Understatement becomes an art form. A soldier completely soaked by a tropical storm might calmly announce, "Little damp today." Another might spend 6 hours trudging through mud and describe the experience as a pleasant walk. These comments are technically inaccurate. Emotionally, they are perfect. Humor also creates connection. People laugh together, share stories, create memories, build friendships. The jungle can feel enormous. The war can feel overwhelming. A good joke shrinks the world back down to human size. For a few minutes, it is not about the conflict. It is about the people beside you, the people sharing the same experience, the same heat, the same food, the same mosquitoes, the same hopes of one day enjoying a completely unreasonable amount of air conditioning. As evening settles in, the laughter gradually fades into quieter conversations. The stars appear overhead through gaps in the canopy. The jungle hums around you. The day has been long. The patrol has been exhausting. Yet morale somehow survives. Not because conditions are easy, but because people find ways to endure them together. A joke, a story, a laugh at exactly the right moment. Small things, powerful things. And eventually, as the conversation drifts toward home once again, another topic begins appearing more frequently. Not food this time, not weather, not mosquitoes. Something even more important. The day when all of this will finally end. The long road home. Eventually, conversations turn toward home. Everyone imagines returning. Some count days, others count weeks. The thought of ordinary comforts grows larger the longer you're away from them. It's usually not a dramatic conversation. Nobody stands up and delivers an emotional speech. No stirring music begins playing in the background. The subject simply appears, quietly, naturally, like it always does. You're sitting with a group after another long day. The jungle is settling into its nighttime rhythm. Insects hum from the darkness. Someone is cleaning equipment. Someone else is writing a letter. And then somebody mentions home. Just one sentence. Maybe they're talking about a favorite restaurant. Maybe a fishing spot. Maybe a street they used to drive down every morning. That's all it takes. Within minutes, everyone is thinking about it. Home. Not necessarily a specific place, more a collection of things. People, sounds, smells, memories, comforts. The little pieces of ordinary life that suddenly feel extraordinary when they're far away. You begin noticing how often your imagination visits familiar places. A kitchen table, a backyard, a favorite chair, a local diner, a quiet street after sunset. Things you barely thought about before now occupy premium space in your mind. The human brain has a funny habit of appreciating things most when they aren't available. Back home, you might walk into your house and barely notice it. Out here, you'd happily write poetry about a functioning refrigerator. A cold drink becomes legendary. A hot shower becomes mythical. A mattress becomes the greatest engineering achievement in human history. The conversations often drift toward food. Again, everything eventually returns to food. It's one of the few reliable laws of the universe. Someone starts describing a meal they're planning to eat when they get home. Then someone else adds another meal. Soon the discussion has transformed into an imaginary feast, large enough to feed a small nation. Steaks, burgers, ice cream, pizza, fresh bread, cold milk, actual vegetables that didn't arrive in a can. The menu grows increasingly ambitious. Nobody complains. Everyone contributes. These meals exist entirely in the future. That's part of what makes them comforting. The future itself becomes important. People count days, sometimes literally. Calendars become treasured possessions. Dates become milestones. The passing of time becomes something visible, manageable, trackable. Each day completed is one day closer, one day nearer to familiar faces, one day nearer to ordinary life, one day nearer to sleeping in a bed that doesn't contain roots. A surprisingly appealing feature. The funny thing is that home starts becoming idealized. Your memory quietly edits things. The annoying neighbor becomes charming. The boring commute becomes nostalgic. The restaurant you once complained about becomes a culinary masterpiece. Even chores begin sounding pleasant. Given enough time in the jungle, mowing the lawn starts looking like a luxury vacation. Perspective is a powerful thing. Of course, everyone understands that life back home hasn't stopped. Families continue living. Friends continue working. The world continues moving forward. You won't be returning to a frozen moment in time. You'll be returning to a world that kept going. That's part of the reason letters matter so much. They provide little glimpses of that ongoing world. Evidence that life continues. Evidence that home is still there, waiting. The road home isn't only physical, it's emotional too. People carry hopes, plans, dreams, ideas about what they'll do first. Some want to see family, some want a particular meal, some want to sleep for an entire week. A perfectly reasonable ambition. The jungle has given everyone a renewed appreciation for sleep. As the evening grows darker, the conversation becomes quieter, more thoughtful. The stars peek through openings in the canopy above. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter can be heard faintly crossing the night sky. The familiar thump of its rotors drifts through the darkness. For a few moments, everyone is lost in their own thoughts, thinking about places, thinking about people, thinking about futures that still feel just out of reach. Yet there is comfort in the imagining, comfort in the planning, comfort in believing that one day the journey ends, because eventually it does. For most people, the long road home arrives. The uniforms come off, the packs come off, the jungle becomes a memory. But memories have a habit of traveling home with you, and that's something nobody fully understands yet, because leaving Vietnam turns out to be much easier than leaving every part of the experience behind. That's a lesson waiting further down the road. Returning home doesn't necessarily mean leaving the experience behind. Many veterans carry memories, lessons, friendships, and scars long after the war itself ends. History has a way of continuing long after the dates in textbooks stop. For months, maybe longer, you've imagined this moment. The flight home, the familiar streets, the familiar faces, the first real meal, the first real shower, the first night in an actual bed, not a sleeping bag, not a patch of ground, not a place where a root is attempting to become part of your spine. A real bed. Civilization's greatest achievement. or so it seems. The journey home finally arrives. Airports replace jungle trails. Buildings replace trees. Traffic replaces insects. For the first time in a very long while, you find yourself surrounded by ordinary life. The strange thing is that ordinary life feels slightly unfamiliar. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. Like returning to a hometown that looks exactly the same, but somehow feels different. Part of that is because the world kept moving while you were away. Stores changed, people changed, neighborhoods changed. Life continued doing what life always does, marching forward. But part of the difference comes from somewhere else. You changed too. That realization doesn't always arrive immediately. At first, there's relief. Enormous relief. The kind of relief that comes from sleeping in a clean bed, eating fresh food, taking a hot shower without wondering whether the weather, the terrain, or a mosquito will somehow interfere. The simple pleasures feel extraordinary. You turn a faucet and clean water appears. Amazing. You flip a switch and a light comes on. Incredible. You open a refrigerator and discover cold drinks waiting inside. Practically magic. For a while, everything feels wonderfully easy, wonderfully normal, wonderfully dry. The dryness alone deserves appreciation. Then, gradually, you notice certain habits sticking around. You still pay attention to sounds. You still notice details. You still scan rooms without really thinking about it. You still appreciate comforts other people barely notice. A comfortable chair, a quiet evening, a meal shared with family. The jungle has a way of changing your relationship with ordinary things. Suddenly, ordinary things don't seem so ordinary. Veterans throughout history have often described this experience in different ways. Not just Vietnam veterans. Veterans from many wars. You leave home as one person. You return carrying experiences that are difficult to fully explain. How do you describe months of heat and humidity to someone sitting comfortably in an air-conditioned living room? How do you explain the feeling of carrying everything you need on your back, or sleeping in the jungle, or learning to identify dozens of sounds in the darkness? Some experiences resist simple explanations, not because people don't want to understand, because words sometimes struggle to carry the full weight of memory. The friendships remain especially important. When people endure difficult circumstances together, bonds form. Shared hardships create connections. Shared jokes, shared frustrations, shared stories. Many veterans remained close long after the war ended, because some experiences can only be fully understood by people who lived them. There's comfort in that. Comfort in not needing to explain every detail. Sometimes a look is enough. Sometimes a story is enough. Sometimes a joke is enough. The humor survives too. Interestingly enough, human beings carry their laughter with them, even the strange jungle humor, especially the strange jungle humor. You might spend years telling stories that begin with phrases like, "You won't believe this," or "There was this one time in Vietnam." And somehow the story always ends with rain, mud, mosquitoes, or somebody making a terrible decision. Usually several of those things at once. Memory works in curious ways. Some moments become crystal clear. Others fade. Certain sounds remain unforgettable. Certain faces remain unforgettable. Certain places remain unforgettable. The smell of rain. The sound of helicopters. The endless chorus of insects after sunset. A letter from home. A joke shared during a difficult day. These moments linger, not because they're dramatic, because they're human. History books often focus on beginnings and endings. Wars begin, wars end. Dates are recorded, chapters conclude, Real life rarely works that neatly. Experiences continue influencing people long after the official ending. The story keeps going, just in different forms. Eventually, life settles into a new rhythm. Families grow, careers develop, years pass, decades pass. The jungle becomes more distant, yet certain lessons remain. An appreciation for comfort, an appreciation for peace, an appreciation for ordinary days, the kind of days people often take for granted. And perhaps that's one of the most lasting changes of all. Because after everything you've experienced, ordinary life no longer seems ordinary. It seems remarkable. A hot meal, a comfortable bed, a quiet evening, a conversation with family. Simple things, powerful things, things worth appreciating. And as you reflect on all of it, the heat, the rain, the mud, the waiting, the friendships, the laughter, and the long journey home, you arrive at one final realization. You probably wouldn't have lasted very long in Vietnam, but the people who did, they found ways to keep going, one day at a time. And that may be the most remarkable part of the entire story. And now we arrive at the uncomfortable conclusion. It isn't just the heat, the jungle, the mud, the insects, or the uncertainty. It's all of them together, every day, without pause. Modern life has spoiled us wonderfully. Climate control, dry socks, reliable food, comfortable beds. In comparison, one day in Vietnam might feel less like an adventure and more like an extremely persuasive argument for appreciating AIR conditioning. Let's be honest, you wouldn't last a day. Neither would most people. In fact, if we're being completely fair, many of us would begin struggling somewhere around the moment the humidity introduced itself. Remember how this journey started? You woke up soaked in sweat before sunrise. Not after exercise, not after a long day, before the day had even started. For many modern adults, that alone would trigger an immediate customer complaint. To whom? Unclear, but someone would hear about it. Then came breakfast, a meal served from a can while sitting in a jungle full of insects. Not a charming camping experience, not a carefully planned outdoor adventure sponsored by an expensive equipment company. Just breakfast. And somehow, that was one of the easier parts of the day. Then you carried your entire life on your back, through heat, through mud, through rain, through terrain specifically designed to make walking feel like a personal challenge issued by the earth itself. Meanwhile, modern people become annoyed when the grocery store parking space is too far from the entrance. History can be humbling. The jungle certainly was. Let's review the evidence. Your clothes were wet, your boots were wet, your socks were wet, your equipment was wet, the ground was wet, the air was wet. At some point, even the concept of dryness became theoretical. A rumor passed between generations, a forgotten legend from another age. Then came the mosquitoes, thousands of tiny flying reminders that nature occasionally creates creatures for no reason other than mischief. Back home, one mosquito can ruin an evening. In Vietnam, the mosquitoes arrived like they were attending a convention. You swatted one. 3 more appeared. You swatted those. The jungle sent reinforcements. No reasonable person wins that battle. The rain wasn't much better. Modern weather forecasts politely inform you that rain may occur later in the afternoon. Vietnam's weather simply appeared overhead and declared war. One moment sunshine, The next moment, you're standing inside what feels suspiciously like an ocean that has decided to fall from the sky. Then there was the waiting. People rarely think about waiting when they imagine war. Yet waiting was everywhere. Waiting for orders, waiting for information, waiting for transportation, waiting for something to happen. Human beings complain about waiting 3 minutes for a microwave. Imagine waiting for hours while remaining completely alert. It's harder than it sounds. Much harder. And through all of this, uncertainty remained your constant companion. The jungle hid things. The darkness hid things. The terrain hid things. Sometimes even the ground beneath your feet felt questionable. You never received the luxury of complete certainty. Most modern lives are built around reducing uncertainty. Maps tell us where we're going. Phones tell us what's happening. Weather apps tell us when it's going to rain. Reviews tell us whether a restaurant is worth visiting. Imagine removing most of that, then adding humidity, lots of humidity. Yet here's the remarkable part. People adapted. They always do. The soldiers who served in Vietnam weren't superheroes. They weren't movie characters. They weren't invincible. They were ordinary human beings dealing with extraordinary circumstances. The same kind of human beings who worried about family, who missed home, who laughed at bad jokes, who complained about food, who counted the days until they could sleep in a real bed again. The same kind of human beings sitting around campfires, kitchen tables, and living rooms throughout history. That's what makes their endurance so impressive. Not that they were superhuman, that they weren't. They got tired, they got frustrated, they got homesick, they got bitten by mosquitoes, repeatedly. The mosquitoes deserve historical recognition at this point, and yet they kept going. One patrol, one meal, one letter, one day at a time. Perhaps that's the biggest misconception people have about surviving difficult periods in history. They imagine bravery as something dramatic, something cinematic, something accompanied by orchestral music. More often, bravery looks surprisingly ordinary. It looks like getting up tomorrow and doing it again, and again, and again, despite the discomfort, despite the uncertainty, despite the challenges. The people who served in Vietnam did not wake up every morning feeling fearless. They woke up tired, sweaty, hungry, mosquito-bitten, and occasionally irritated by canned food. Then they kept going anyway, which, when you think about it, might be a more useful definition of courage. As the jungle settles around you one final time, the insects humming in the darkness and the humid air hanging heavy beneath the canopy, you can almost appreciate the scale of what daily life demanded. Not perfection, not heroics, endurance, patience, adaptation, the willingness to face another difficult day. And if this little historical journey has taught you anything, it's probably this. The next time your AIR conditioning works perfectly, the next time your socks are dry, the next time your dinner doesn't arrive in a dented metal can, take a moment to appreciate it. Because history has provided a very compelling argument for modern comforts. And Vietnam provided one of the strongest arguments of all. Now, after surviving the heat, the mud, the rain, the mosquitoes, the jungle, and approximately 17,000 uncomfortable life lessons, you have finally made it to the end of the day.